So it appears that everybody wants some of Warner Brothers. It is now said that not only Skydance/Paramount is putting in a mostly cash bid offer on Warner Brothers, it is now said that Netflix is getting into the game of placing a bid on the classic studio that has brought us so many great films and has a legendary vault of IPs. If you don't already, go hit the subscribe button to never miss a video. We have daily film content, including film reviews, movie news, and more. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button to never miss a video. Now, there's been a lot of uproar in the film industry because of this news of Warner Brothers being potentially bought. Now, it is said that Skydance/Paramount is making a mostly cash bid offer on Warner Brothers, and it is because the current owner who owned Skydance and bought out Paramount is now trying to buy out Warner Brothers, and he's going to use his father's money because apparently he is the child of one of the richest billionaires in the world. We're not talking about Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. We're talking old money, and he's going to pretty much use his father's inheritance from his father to bankroll this buy to buy Warner Brothers. Now, with that being said, a lot of people of what I'm reading in the industry insiders is saying that they are very nervous about another studio being bought out because less studios means less work and less films being greenlit. Now, as far as that goes, I don't think that's very much true. I mean, I don't work inside the industry, but just as somebody who watches a lot of films and goes to pretty much as many films, well, I see not every film in theaters, but I try to see as many as possible. And there's a lot. I've made a couple of videos about this, and I feel like we're going to take a quick side note, that there are so many films that are being greenlit, made, and distributed that aren't getting the time of day, and a lot of that has to do with marketing and just studios not fully investing in the product. They're just kind of aimlessly putting shit out there just to produce product to kind of try to fill a void, but they're not really, there's no real formula or any real marketing strategy behind any of it. So, since Disney, we'll use this example, took over 20th Century Fox, has there been less films produced? I don't really think so, especially coming from Fox over their overall IPs and their you'd call them, like Fox Searchlight, which was a indie version of 20th Century Fox, where you had more of your art house and your more obscure story-driven films kind of coming out through there. They weren't your big blockbuster popcorn flicks. Now, that we would think would have went away completely, but it didn't. They just changed the title from from Fox Searchlight to just Searchlight Pictures, because they've produced and released a couple of films this year, including The Roses being one of them. And I think there was at least two more I saw in theaters in the last 6 weeks that were put out by Searchlight. Just drawing my top of my head right this second. So, yeah, they're still producing films under that sublet. So it's not like we're producing less films. Honestly, in this day and age, in the past 15 years, more films are being greenlit than ever. It's just you're not getting as many $300 million budget films, and it kind of seems like less films being hit in theaters. But really, it's just less films with astronomical, over-the-top budgets that we really don't need to make good films. And that has everything, I think, to do with the fact that we've gotten so oversaturated with these blockbusters that are all cost over $300 million to make, that when they start pushing out films that are less than that, or less than a $200 to $300 million budget, it's like they're not producing any films at all, which really isn't the case. A prime example of that too, Disney owning Fox IP, they put out 2 Predator movies this year alone. Well, I'm sorry, they're putting out 2. One came out in May or June, straight to streaming on Hulu, which was a animated film, and the same director who did that also is doing Predator Badlands that comes out in theaters in November. A big blockbuster budget, looks pretty good from the trailers. They kind of did mess up the Predator a little bit compared to what he originally looked like, so they but I'm still going to go see it in theaters every weekend. But that's not the point. The whole point of this being is that they haven't stopped producing films. Disney didn't buy 20th Century Fox to stop making movies or to make less movies or to take out a competitor. They did that so they can now own that competitor, all that IP, and then produce more films under the various different outlets that they now have. Because a big part of that is, now it's less with Warner Brothers if it gets bought out by Paramount, because Paramount kind of has the same structure, as Warner Brothers will say. But like Disney is not going to produce, and we have a little history lesson on this too, is not going to produce R-rated, bloody, gory films under the Disney logo. They're not going to. Marvel is very much Disney. Why do you think all Marvel movies have been very much PG-13 and there's nothing really crossing that line? Deadpool and Wolverine is the first R-rated film we've really gotten under the Disney umbrella, but even that is pushed out under 20th Century Fox, and it doesn't have the Disney logo on it. It's pushed out by 20th Century Fox. Back in the 90s, Disney owned Miramax, which put out films like Clerks, Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs, pretty much everything. Kevin Smith, Tarantino, Roger Rodriguez, all those films were all put out by Miramax, which was owned by Disney. Dimension Films, owned by Miramax, which was owned by Disney. Scream, The Faculty. There's so many films that were put out through Disney under their umbrella of various corporations that they owned or studios that they owned, really just to keep the Disney brand in the clear from having these more adult content kind of films. Now that being said, when Disney bought out 20th Century Fox, they didn't take off Rocky Horror. Rocky Horror still plays in theaters now. I went into a live stream. I've seen Rocky Horror in theaters not that long ago, and they actually play it in the one theater every second weekend of every month. So it's not like they just took away those films and they've taken away all these films and all this production. Disney Plus now has Disney Plus, Hulu, Lucasfilms, Marvel. What else do they have? It's like two other things they own now under their umbrella. So what they're doing is they're buying more to be able to have a bigger hold, to produce more content and offer more under one umbrella of a company, so they have more buying power and producing power. So with that being said, if Paramount bought out Warner Brothers, really all that does is give them all the IP that Warner Brothers owns, which is a lot, because you also have New Line Cinema, which Warner Brothers owns, and there's a couple other sub-companies that Warner Brothers owns and produce films through that aren't necessarily through the Warner Brother brand. So that would give them more producing power to give us more films and be able to put them out through these other various sub-companies, so it's not necessarily coming through Paramount or through Warner Brothers. Like Dark Castle, prime example, is a Warner Brothers company. They produce films like Ghost Ship, 13 Ghosts, and a lot of the horror films, House of Wax, that we got in the early 2000s, but it wasn't through Warner Brothers. It was Dark Castle. Time Warner is a Warner Brothers company through the head of Warner Brothers. They gave us films like the Before trilogy and all these indie films. That was their indie brand. So really, these production companies have multiple other production companies. The studio owns multiple sublets, like mini studios within itself, which really kind of holds so much more. So if Paramount bought Warner Brothers, I think that would actually be a little iffy, because yes, that's one less studio to produce films, but I think with the head of science who bought out Paramount, since like they've been producing some really great films and they've been on a really hot streak. If you look at their P&L and all of their films they produced and the gross profit return, they've actually been doing really well in box office, and also the films they produce are actually really good, or better than the mediocrity that we've been getting. So with them taking over Warner Brothers, I think we would have a lot more quality films coming out, and you'd have that umbrella where you're making more money because you're producing more films, and you're going to have more leeway because, again, you're having more IP to work with. Now, with that being said, Netflix is also in the running or in talks to try to buy Warner Brothers. Now, a lot of people are scared about that because Netflix is very anti-theatrical releases and very much a streaming platform. If they buy one of the bigs, is that going to, another hurdle and another kind of knife in the back of theaters and taking away from theatrical releases and putting them straight on streaming? Now, that is, again, a 50-50, because look at Amazon. Amazon bought out MGM, and they recently acquired the rights to the 007 franchise, James Bond, all projects moving forward. Now, with that being said, MGM, yes, Amazon did kind of screw the pooch with Roadhouse and kind of screw Doug Liman, because he was originally making that film to be a big Hollywood, theatrical release film, and then Amazon pulled the plug last minute and put it right on streaming. And yeah, I understand why Doug Liman was upset about that. I feel like Roadhouse should have been a theatrical release film. I thought it was phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. Can't wait for the sequel. Definitely a film I would love to see in theaters. I actually watched it in my basement. So I have a home theater, but still not the same as watching it in theaters. But seeing on the biggest screen possible definitely would have been a huge asset to that film. But Amazon does put films in theaters. I think they should do more with putting more rules in place to ensure theatrical releases to try to save the theatrical experience. But we don't know how that's going to work, because not every film they try to make is going to be an Oscar-worthy film or a film in which is going to have award-winning statue, if you will. Now, with that being said, Netflix does do a decent amount of theatrical releases with certain films. Yes, when I say decent, I mean they put out their films in theaters because they want to get them Oscar-nominated and they want to make them eligible for the Oscars. Like Roma was in theaters for a short window in select cities. Frankenstein is supposedly supposed to be getting a theatrical release in select cities for a limited time, which, again, these films premiere at premiere film festivals. And I feel like if they had, I think even if these film festivals and made rules and regulations that when you have these films coming from these streaming companies, in order to premiere at these festivals, they have to be given a window of release. Now, is Netflix going to be in the game of releasing films in theaters? I don't know. I mean, they did K-pop, I think it was last month, and it was in theaters for 2 weeks, while it was simultaneously on Netflix. It still made like $18.7 million in like 2 weeks or something like that. It actually was the number one at the box office the one weekend, and it was already on Netflix. So it was a Netflix movie. They just threw it in theaters, and it became the number one movie that weekend in theaters. So I think that's them trying to dip their toes in the theatrical experience and see if it's profitable. And it looks like it could be profitable for them to do so. Now, if they bought Warner Brothers, realistically, they would have to put films in theaters. They couldn't just produce everything for Netflix or everything for streaming, because it wouldn't work. The budgets would not work. I mean, the head of Disney, Bob Iger, I believe his name was, even came out and said that streaming's not working. It was great at first because you had all that additional revenue coming in, and it was just piling in. But now, in long term, we're losing money. Like, Disney lost a lot of money because of their streaming services, because all these films are producing for streaming. Warner Brothers lost a lot of money because of everything they're putting on streaming. The head of Warner Brothers even said, I believe it was a few weeks ago, I read an article that they are focusing primarily on theatrical releases, and they're going to have the streaming service predominantly only putting on there or making exclusive for streaming TV shows. And streaming is going to, I think, in the next couple of years, really take over cable completely, and it's going to replace cable, because cable is still there and it still hasn't been completely replaced yet. And even though streaming, a lot of people of a certain generation don't even know what cable is, there is still a lot of people who use cable, and that's still kind of a thing. But I think in the next couple of years, streaming is going to completely overtake cable, and it's just going to replace it. And we're going to have ads and everything. It's going to be commercials and everything else brought back into streaming like it is with cable. And you can pay your extra money for ad free, but even then, I think they're going to charge so much more for that ad free experience, because just a brief little snippet of how television works and how the rights work. Shows don't make money in their initial run. Most shows make money off of reruns and being sold off to other networks for reruns, because they make the money back in commercials. Like Friends. Friends made more money, Friends has made Warner Brothers so much money because it was such a popular show that every year at the annual TV, whatever it's called, I don't know the exact thing it's called, but it's like a conference, and every year they sell off the rights to various TV shows to various different networks like TBS, TNT, USA, and they'll have reruns playing, because again, television, you have something playing 24 hours a day. So I remember like 2 years ago I was on vacation and sitting in the hotel room. It was a hotel room, and I was sitting there watching TV. Friends was on. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning, eating popcorn, watching Friends reruns on TBS. They're making money off their ad revenue because they have ads and commercials playing through each episode. There's like 7 minutes of commercials in every 30-minute episode. That's where all that revenue is coming from, and that's how Friends makes money still for Warner Brothers. off an initial run, especially with streaming, you're not making, because it costs them so much money to keep things on streaming. They have to pay the actors, writers, directors, cast members. They have to pay everybody royalty fees for every time it's on streaming past every year. So every time it renews for the following year, they have to pay more revenue in royalties, which cost the company money that they are no longer making off of that revenue. Because if you put 100,000 things on streaming, you're paying only one low price, you're not making any other revenue. The more, and you got to continue to produce more product that costs more money, you're losing money out. You're just continue to bleed out money. So that's why you see a lot of original shows are now being on different streaming services after initial runs, because they have to make up that money by selling off the rights, or lease the rights out, and so on and so forth. So without getting too deep into it, this is pretty much about the whole buyout of Warner Brothers. What this video is supposed to be about is that, okay, yeah, Netflix might buy Warner Brothers, but it could not be a streaming service alone. It would have to boost up its theatrical release and really put films in theaters, because, again, Warner Brothers owns DC. Now, of course, if Netflix bought Warner Brothers, they could fire James Gunn and just do away with all of DC's future projects. I don't see that happening, because we're still sort of in this, I feel like we're in this phase where we're still kind of in limbo of the superhero genre. I think it's on its way out. I don't think it's completely faded out yet. Because James Wan said in one interview that, there's he doesn't think there's superhero fatigue, there's just bad movie fatigue. And then after Superman failed at the box office, he's saying, oh, well, Superman's not as notable as a character, that's why it failed globally or internationally. And I would argue that if that's not true, Superman is one of the most iconic characters, up there with Spider-Man, as far as superheroes go. Superman has been a on-screen superhero since the 1970s. He has more screen time and more presence than any other superhero there is. He is one of the most iconic superheroes, I would argue. So the fact that it failed at the box office has nothing to do with him not being a well-known superhero. It just has a lot to do with people are tired of seeing the same stories and the same thing just being rehashed and remade. Because this is, again, the second reboot of Superman in the past 7 years, 8 years of film. But you also had all the TV remakes. And then, of course, in the past, we'll say the last 25 years, since 2000 to now, we've had 3 film Supermans on screen, live action. You've had 2 in the past 7 years. You had various different iterations of Superman on television with Smallville. You had the Arrowverse, and then Lois and Superman TV show. You had it so much, you're kind of draining, and you're just pulling everything out of that character that you have. And so with that being said, Warner Bros. Is running out of ideas, I feel like, and a lot of their IP is, they're milking their IP, trying to make profits again, because instead of taking risks, they're just trying to play it safe, and they're milking it dry. Even with Harry Potter. Now, Harry Potter was a global phenomenon, and it was a huge thing. I grew up watching Harry Potter. I remember seeing the first one in theaters. My friend's dad took me and him to see it, and I think I was 8 years old. I remember seeing the first one in theaters, and saw the second one in theaters. I remember seeing the last one in theaters, and I remember how big a deal it was. It was a huge deal. And I worked at Walmart at the time, and I remember when the last one came out on physical media, it was a huge thing. We had this huge castle of Hogwarts in our back action alley through electronics. It was this huge thing. Lots of people were coming and buying the box sets. It was a huge ordeal. Now, of course, they tried to piggyback on that with the Fantastic Beasts franchise, which got 3 films. I didn't think they were great personally, but again, they tried to milk with that. Didn't really work. And now they're trying a 10-year-long span of Harry Potter series on HBO Max, which is already getting a lot of backlash, and most people aren't going to watch it probably because they're ruining what was already great. It's too early for a reboot. We don't need a reboot. Harry Potter just went off screens a decade ago. We don't need another reboot already. And I feel like that's what Warner Brothers is trying to do so much, is they're trying to milk their own IP. So I feel like if Skydance or Netflix bought out Warner Brothers, it could be either way, because it could go either way. They're going to try to continue to milk IP and just continue to diminish everything that Warner Bros. Has to offer, or are they going to take a new route and use that extra platform to produce more films in a higher light? Now, the only thing I can see good coming from this is if Netflix bought Warner Brothers and used that as an outlet to produce better quality films and put them out in theatrical releases. Not even big budget films. They could just do quality films at smaller budgets, but give theatrical releases to help bring in revenue. Because there's a lot of great films that Netflix has and acquires the rights to that need theatrical releases and will be highly successful in theaters if given an opportunity. But with that being said, they'd have to use Warner Brothers as their outlet for that theatrical release and keep Netflix streaming, and Warner Brothers would be their outlet for theatrical releases, which I don't know if that's their plan, but that's something I think would be phenomenal. It's already known Netflix bought the rights to Richard Linklater's newest film, which is about the making of the 1960s film Breathless by Jean-Luc Godard, which started the French New Wave, which is this huge film amongst film nerds everybody's dying to see. It premiered back at Sundance. Netflix bought the rights to it, and it's been this whole ordeal because a lot of fans are irritated because they know it's not going to get a huge theatrical release, and it's probably going to go straight to Netflix with a minor release, so it checks the boxes for nominations, so it meets all the criterion to be nominated for Oscars. So again, that's kind of a big deal because a lot of fans are hating about that, but Netflix acquires these rights to these really great films, and they need an outlet to kind of work around to do the theatrical release. And I feel like Netflix, if they bought Warner Brothers, could use that to really help push out those type of films, and would also, I think, kind of integrate us into the next wave of mainstream media, and we'll go back to having more quality films, and we'll have less popcorn flicks. And I think that could help trying to restructure the platform of theatrical releases, because there's been a huge issue with theatrical releases in the past decade and a half, where we no longer have, your blockbuster season, your Oscar bait season. There's different seasons in the year where you had different films that came out to theaters, and now it just feels like it's a free-for-all, and films are just being thrown in everywhere, and that's where I think part of the problem is with theatrical releases and kind of the struggle there. But that's for another video. The whole point of being is that, is Warner Bros. Going to be bought? It's too early to tell. I think that, yes, it could be bought out, and there's not going to be a blockage from the government, because a lot of people are thinking, they're going to block that because of monopolization. Disney bought out 20th Century Fox, and Disney was already one of the biggest or bigger production companies. So the fact that they bought out Fox is no problem. I can't see Netflix buying Warner Brothers to be an issue, or Paramount buying Warner Brothers to be an issue. Because, again, they need more buying power to compete against these tech companies like Amazon, who bought MGM, and now Apple is getting into the film game. There's all these other components. So to have them buy out other companies to make mega studios, I don't think it'll be an issue, because I think it was 2020 or 2019, they took out that entire law that stopped studios from buying other studios and buying up other things because they could monopolize, because there's so much more to it now than it was back in the 30s when when production companies owned their own real houses, which produced the celluloid and the film and all the equipment they needed. They owned their own theaters, so they owned everything, so they controlled everything. Now there's too many moving parts. Studios are only 1/3 of really a film's production. You got the studios who make the movies. You have the production companies, we'll call them production companies, who produce the products in which they need, like cameras, sound equipment, film, if they decide to use film, or digital equipment. All that is a separate company, and then theaters are a third company. So you got distribution, your production companies, and then your actual studios. So it's 3 separate entities that make up the distribution of the films, whereas before it was just one owned all three. So now, if the studios are buying each other out, I don't really see that being a monopolization. So I think this is very much going to happen. It's just a matter of when and for how much. But again, I don't think it's, like I said, I don't think it's something to worry about. I think it could be a good thing. But only time will tell. What are your thoughts? Comment below. Let me know.